Hello everyone, welcome back to Geek and Dorks Reviews. I'm John Lorden, and today we're going to talk about Paradise Lost Part 2, Revelations. And this was very interesting. When I started this film, I almost felt like, have you ever had a nightmare and then a few nights later, for some reason, you go to sleep and the same nightmare comes back? That's kind of the same feeling I had going back into this whole story. It is just such a tragic story at its very basic elements. Of course, this is about the West Memphis Three, and originally I kind of assumed that that moniker, the West Memphis Three, was about the 3 8-year-olds that were killed. It's actually apparent to me now, especially after watching Paradise Lost 2, that the West Memphis 3 moniker is more about the 3 men that were charged for those murders. And there are some very distinct differences between Paradise Lost Part 1 and Paradise Lost Part 2. I think the strength in Paradise Lost Part 1 was that the filmmakers, it felt like they weren't trying to lead you to a particular conclusion. They were just trying to show you the information kind of as it happened. They had a lot of access to a ton of different news clips, but they also had courtroom access. They had access to the attorneys. They did a very good job of kind of showing both sides. I know in my first review I did complain that that they didn't go into the evidence enough for me. And in Part 2, it's kind of explained why a bit better. Apparently, the case just did not use that much physical evidence. And in Part 2, it goes through some of the appeals processes, and now they're finally starting to find some experts, and some more tangible physical evidence is coming into play. With all that being said, there's a big difference between Part 1 and Part 2 for me, in that Part 2 does not seem to have that same unbiased, tell both sides of the story nature. It also doesn't have a whole lot of court coverage. I think most of the court coverage that occurs in it is footage from the first movie. It doesn't have, it kind of takes things to a different layer, and it's more about what people are saying about the case. It's more about feelings about the case. They do have access to the defense, there's one defense lawyer that basically stuck with the West Memphis Three through the course of all this, and he is a key figure in this sequel. But it's weird because in terms of it being a sequel, it gets much more interpersonal. It's much more about the relationships and what's happening around those, which they did touch on in the first one, but wasn't kind of a main feature of it. I would say this one focuses on it. And some people would debate, well, they are telling both sides of the story because, they're basically showing the West Memphis Three and their legal team, and then they're showing primarily the father of one of the victims, and he has some very strong viewpoints about the fact that these 3 young men are supposed to be in prison. I don't want to spoil it for you, but there is an overarching narrative in Paradise Lost 2 that is very clear from early on in the film, and it was kind of nagging at me as I was watching it because I just kept asking myself, why do the filmmakers feel so certain about this point of view that they're expressing? How come they're not challenging it more? And in particular, you get to the end and there is some information at the very end where I was like, oh, well, this must be why. Maybe they really figured out something about this case. And then it kind of doesn't really go that way. So at the very end of this movie, I was a little more confused. I could see why they're leaning in the direction they were leaning. I just wish that they were much more fair about looking at both sides of that story. And they do present some compelling evidence for the side that they are presenting. I just feel like there isn't a lot to counterbalance it, and not a lot for the rest of us that want to truly get to the truth to try to dig through and see in this. Outside of all that, if anything, I think the aspect that I enjoyed the most is almost what I'd kind of consider the brain scratch effect. It is a very cool time capsule about social media and the power of social media. It's kind of early in the internet age. I mean, this is all going on between, I think, 1996 and 1999 is kind of the time range of this documentary. So, people are now creating websites and putting causes together, and essentially there is a group that puts together a cause for the West Memphis Three to kind of have this looked into a bit better. There's a lot of backlash from the first movie coming out where people think that these guys are really innocent, and these people all bond together, pull some resources together, help get experts into this case that haven't looked into it before. And in terms of all that, that is a great aspect of this documentary that I truly, truly enjoyed, because it's basically what I believe in terms of doing Brain Scratch, that if there's an independent mind out there that's able to look at all this stuff, talk about it fairly, and then the masses can review that information and come to their own conclusion, that is an extremely strong place to learn from. And that's where I felt like Paradise Lost 1 was great. And Paradise Lost 2, despite the fact that it's showing that mechanic and showing that these people are really just trying to take a fair look at it, the filmmakers, I don't know if it's the filmmakers or the editor, but someone kind of let their own beliefs and thoughts bleed into how this movie came together, and was just a little too strong for me. Just would like them to pull that lever just a little bit back to center. All that being said, I really enjoyed it. I am totally wrapped up in this case right now. I honestly cannot wait to see the third movie. I'm hoping that the third movie might correct some of what I've seen happen in the second movie in terms of the message or their thoughts about what is the truth in this case being overpresented. Basically in a third movie, hopefully they will take the other side of that and try to pull that needle back a little bit. But I really don't know what to expect. I can tell you I am fairly certain that I'm going to want to review much more information about this case after I watch that third documentary. So at this point, I'd say I'm about 50-50 that you guys are going to get a brain scratch on it. I know a lot of you want it. But like I said before, if nothing else, I will definitely shoot a spoiler chat where we can talk about some of the details of this case. That'll kind of feel like a light brain scratch. But I don't know. I got to get through the third one and see if I want to dive into this whole world of research that I think it will take to try to represent that for all of you guys. In terms of it being constructed, I think it's pretty much the same production team. Editing's pretty good. Music is once again done by Metallica, and it included a lot of tracks that I knew. I was kind of in high school or just coming out of high school when this was going on, and one of the Metallica albums, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but the one that had Unforgiven and Enter Sandman and all that, a lot of tracks from that album are used in this film, so it was kind of cool to hear music that I was a little bit more familiar with. And they use it in kind of a cool way, but almost in kind of a cruel way also. I just had this weird little feeling when they would show the father of one of the victims of these kids, and knowing that he's a bit of a religious extremist in how he presents himself. I honestly don't feel like he's as religious as he puts out there. But all of a sudden they'll show him and they'll just crank up this Metallica music, with him. And I don't know, it felt not like, it didn't feel sacrilegious or anything like that, but it just felt like, would he really appreciate that they're using this Metallica music to represent his feelings in this moment when he thought that this was a killing that had to do with these Satan worshipers that listened to Metallica? So it hit me just a little bit odd. Other than that, not as many clips used from the media, no courtroom footage basically. So much different than the first one in what materials they used to put it together, but it was still well assembled, well scored, and entertaining as could possibly be. This one might have hooked me a little more even than the first one for the entire 2+ hours. I think this one ran 2 hours and 13 minutes. So these are not short documentaries, but now that I know that there are 3 of them, if you're going to jump into Paradise Lost, just consider it as a mini-series. Parts 1 and 3 are available to Amazon Prime members, but I had to rent part 2, so just know that that's a little hiccup if you want to catch all of this, but it was only a few dollars, and I really think it was worth it. I would rate this one, the Amazon rating, I see it right now, is 7.7 out of 10. I agree with that. I was going to say 7.5. Just a hitch below the first one, because I think the filmmakers were a little heavy-handed. the materials are not quite as, it's not the sources that I would normally look to, although there is also a cool narrative in here about the media and how they represent things that especially is ringing true for me over these past few weeks with the few stories I've covered where it seems like the media is just getting things totally botched. So it was cool to see that thread kind of pop up in this film. But I think I'm going to end this review here because I really want to get to Paradise Lost 3 and check it out. I think I'm going to watch it today. If that's any indicator for you, this has been a pretty good series in terms of grabbing my attention and keeping me engaged because I really want to see how this all comes out. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me on this edition of Geek and Dorks Reviews and for all your support on the Geek and Dorks channel. I truly, truly appreciate it, as well as all you Patreon supporters. It lifts me up every time I get a message that there's another one of you contributing. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I hope you're all having a great week. I'll see you again on the Geek and Dorks channel.